Hi everyone, Master P here from the Language of Composition 3rd edition. We're here for another close reading video, and today we're taking a look at an excerpt from an article called The Silent Season of a Hero by Talese. So let's jump right into it. We are, of course, reading closely, which means we are reading actively. And that means we're trying to reveal those layers of meaning. We're trying to get at what a writer is arguing, the position he or she is taking on a particular topic or more than one topic, and really trying to go beyond just the surface entertainment, enjoyment value of a text and get at the deeper meaning. So part of doing that is, of course, arriving at a better understanding of a writer's style and rhetorical strategies. So we need certain tools, of course. We need our copy of the Language of Composition 3rd edition, also our key passage handouts. Highlighters are always helpful, and of course something to write with, a pen or a pencil. So we always want to start by thinking about the rhetorical situation, which is really thinking about the rhetorical triangle and how the speaker and the audience and the subject matter is not only shaping the text, but how those elements are shaped by the larger context. And that's what gives us that situation. So what is the occasion that gave rise to this particular text being created? What are the historical factors? What are the contemporary issues and discussions going on? How does all of that shape what's in the rhetorical triangle and the text itself? So for this piece, the speaker is Talese. He was a sports writer, journalist for many, many years. He actually was kind of the founding father of the term new journalism, which in the 1950s and 60s took journalism from the style of journalistic reporting from just being straightforward and just the facts and third person objective to almost more of a narrative style of reporting. And we see this all the time in major publications, the Washington Post, the New York Times, magazines such as The Atlantic and The New Yorker. So it's a style we're familiar with now, but he was actually one of the first to use some of those narrative techniques within an article. Our occasion, this publication, this article was written for Esquire magazine, which is a men's magazine. We'll get to that with our audience. At the time, the article focuses on Joe DiMaggio. And at the time, DiMaggio is 52 years old. He's this great baseball player. He had retired 15 years earlier, but people still revere him. I mean, people still revere him today. They say he's one of the really mythic legends of all sports, not just baseball. So he already was established at the time of this writing. He was established as a star in the sports mythology world. But personally, he had been going through issues since his retirement from baseball. He had been married for a brief period of time to Marilyn Monroe, and they'd had a very important, very passionate marriage. But they ended up getting divorced, and then she had actually committed suicide about 4 years prior to this article being published. So all of that is shaping the story that Talese is telling. And then the larger social construct is that this piece was written in 1966. And so we're right in the thick of the Vietnam War, the hippie movement, this really sort of counterculture. The 1960s were so different than the 1950s and late 40s when Joe DiMaggio was playing baseball. And so you kind of get this sense of a reminiscent mood. This is how pure things used to be. And this was the clean, pure game of baseball. And it's different in the 1960s. So all of that is shaping this particular text. As I said, the audience, since it was published in Esquire magazine, it's a men's magazine. It's for adults. They focus on, men's fashion, men's health, sports, different topics like that. So the subject, of course, Joe DiMaggio is the focus, but it also deals with this concept of a sports hero and the myth of this kind of figure. And then also, again, because Joe DiMaggio is getting older and going from the 50s to the 60s, this whole generation that's aging is definitely, they're aware of the change. That's sort of this this issue that's shaping the periphery of this particular text. All right, so our first step, of course, is to read for understanding. So we're going to take a look at this excerpt, and I'll pause the video so that you can take a moment to read through it and just make sure you understand what's going on in this particular part of the text. All right, so now that we've read for understanding, we want to think about those overall features, right? So we're thinking about purpose, mood, tone, position, just in this particular passage at this particular moment. So I'm going to also refer to my notes, the things that I wrote down. So I said that Talese's purpose is to provide an accurate depiction of DiMaggio, right? And also to analyze the role of the sports hero, or perhaps we'd want to say to analyze the myth of the sports hero, right? So we see that throughout the entire essay, and certainly in this particular passage. The mood, it's this sort of, it's not the right word, but Talese is like a storyteller, and I don't know what word we would want to ascribe to that. It's very calm, it's very soothing, right? So maybe those words would work, but it feels like we're reading a story. And so maybe talk amongst yourselves, see if you can find a word that's perhaps that captures that feeling of a storyteller. So his tone, he's admiring. He certainly seems to be admiring of DiMaggio. When that moment where he talks about the rich people, that tone is very critical, and we'll get to that when we go to the annotating. And his attitude toward the idea of a mythic sports hero is, I would say, skeptical, right? Or at least questioning, because he seems to realize that the myth really doesn't capture the full person. So, and then finally, the position. In this particular passage, his position seems to be that DiMaggio handles his role as a sports hero really well, with grace, let's say. All right, so our next steps, we want to get into actually annotating the text, and we're looking for those smaller pieces of style and how his argument is developed, those rhetorical strategies he uses to develop his argument. So then we'll come back to using our graphic organizer, and then we will use that tool to write our rhetorical analysis. So let's switch over to our passage. All right, so as I said, Talese uses that narrative style of writing. And so we see here that he actually has dialogue, as you would see in a story. Everywhere he goes, the question seems the same, as if he had some special vision into the future of new heroes. And so Talese is already establishing, and earlier he's established the fact that DiMaggio is seen as a hero, but he's an older hero. So this motif of age. And everywhere he goes, two older men grab his hand and feel his arm and predict he could still go out there and hit one. So this idea, again, of age and how people are dealing with age and their own aging, and how their own feelings about age or aging is projected onto their feelings about the people they worshipped when they were young, right? Someone like Joe DiMaggio. So the smile on Joe DiMaggio's face is genuine, and this gets at that admiring tone that Talese is pointing out how gracefully DiMaggio reacts to this kind of intrusion into his personal life all the time, right? He tries to remain as he was. We have this whole section here that's really interesting. This is all about his body and how his physical health he tries. And I think this word, and maybe even tries hard, is important, right? Because it implies that he either will fail or is failing, because nobody can stop how time affects our bodies, right? So he tries, he's making an effort, but in the end, of course, his body will get older. So we have this great imagery here. And all of this sort of underscores his mortality. And that sets us up for this section down here. Still, he's always an impressive figure at banquets such as this, and immortal, sports writers call him. And that is how they have written about him and others like him. So he's seen as an immortal. And in fact, he is in better shape than other people. But Talese, by describing his physical body, still gets at the point that DiMaggio is a mortal human being, of course, rarely suggesting that such heroes might even be prone to the ills of mortal men, right? So setting up this logical, I think, conclusion that if you really examine one of these heroes, you get to the point that they're immortal, that they are, of course, mortal, and they're prone to the ills of mortal men. And then he lists some of those ills, right? Carousing, drinking, scheming. And so he's got this list of those three things. To suggest this, and I think this is interesting too, right? Because he's really alluding to his own role by writing about DiMaggio and explaining his personal life and describing him in this way. Talese is trying to pull back the curtain, right? And so Talese is suggesting that DiMaggio and other sports heroes are mortal. So this gets at his own role in this particular article. To suggest this would destroy, let me switch to the next page, the myth, right? Would disillusion small boys, would infuriate rich men. So we've got these three things all set up in parallel sentence structure, right? And I think too, there's maybe this implicit question. Does Talese, in this article, by writing such personal information about DiMaggio, does he actually disillusion small boys or infuriate rich men? Or does he just give people a more complete view of this particular human being? So let's look at how he describes rich men. Rich men who own ball clubs and to whom baseball is a business dedicated to profit and in pursuit of which they trade mediocre players' flesh as casually as boys trade players' pictures on bubblegum cards. So that statement right there, the fact that these men see it as a business, look at the business, profit, pursuit, and then flesh. These are very critical word choices to describe a group of people, these rich men. So that would support our tone that he seems to be criticizing these men. And so the baseball hero must always act the part, must preserve the myth, and none does it better than DiMaggio. None is more patient when drunken old men grab an arm and ask, who's going to take it this year, Joe? So I want to look at that last section in particular. So let's go back to our graphic organizer. Okay. So we want to pull out a quotation that we think is particularly important. I'm going to paraphrase it and to make sure that I understand what the quotation is really saying. And then I want to make sure I can identify the rhetorical strategy or style element. And then the most important part, the most difficult part, is to comment on the effect or function of the quotation and the rhetorical strategy. All right, so as I said, the quote that I wanted to look at, sorry, let me go back one, is the last part that I just read out loud, right? So I'm not going to read it again. So we will go to the next one. So my way of paraphrasing it, I said, people who are seen as baseball heroes must behave a certain expected way, and DiMaggio patiently does. So that's how I put it into my own words. I noticed in regard to diction that he uses the word the very purposefully, and normally we don't think of the word the as an important word to point out. Usually when we're talking about diction, we're looking at words that have a very strong connotation. But in this case, the fact that he says the baseball hero, the myth, feels important. So also the fact that he repeats the word none and uses that narrative style, that imagery of grabbing an arm, and then this dialogue at the very end of that passage. So my statement here, I said the use of the word the before baseball hero and myth makes both terms appear to have one definition, right? There's just the baseball hero and the myth. So there's not much room for interpretation, right? It's sort of, here's what it is, and this person has to fit within these boundaries. I also said DiMaggio fulfills the characteristics of the one definition, which we see through the small moment described with that narrative style. Okay, so I want to pull that together, refine it a little bit, make sure that I could use this information in a rhetorical analysis. So the statement I wrote, I said, Talese depicts DiMaggio as someone who both fulfills and frustrates the idea of the myth. Frustrates the idea of the myth of the baseball hero, right? So I'm making, that's my interpretation that's my claim, right? So when you analyze a text, you are interpreting, you are making a claim. And so this is what I think Talese is doing. And I can support that, right? The use of the word the implies that only one definition of these ideas exist. So in order to meet the expectations, DiMaggio, or others like him, must fulfill strict expected behaviors. Talese employs a narrative style to capture these moments, including the imagery of drunken old men who grab DiMaggio and dialogue. Maybe let me add the use of dialogue to give us a sense of the inane comments DiMaggio must listen to with patience, right? So I've provided my interpretation. I've supported that interpretation with textual evidence, with my explanation of the technique, and that's a really important part too. And then I've just repeated that, right, with a couple of different examples. Okay, so hopefully I could take this information and I could apply those skills to writing a well-written essay in which I could analyze the rhetorical strategies Talese uses to convey his position on the mythic sports hero. So that's it. So I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for all of your hard work. All of us with the Language of Composition 3rd edition say, keep up the good work and fare thee well, young scholars.